with the Ardennes, one had to always, the possibility there would be a counterattack.
September 1st, 1939, the start of the war that wiped out most of the planet. The German troops invade Poland for a priceless victory. A fierce battle was displayed, and the Germans came out victorious. But this was just the start of the Germans' rampage. 3rd September 1939, Great Britain were in their prime, displaying power more than anyone could even imagine. But they took a shocking turn after declaring war on Germany alongside France. The Germans were nothing in front of these two powers, but they had one weapon. The German army was led by the Nazis and their fierce leader, Adolf Hitler. This was the start of the Great World War II. The Western Europe wouldn't take this war seriously, calling it the phony war, but that all changed. Both of these powers, Great Britain and France, would unite to fight Germany because of the treaty placed between them in 1763 called the Treaty of Paris. Now this war took place on the seashore of southern Britain, and the destruction was unfathomable. The Germans defeated France and came to attack Britain. It was shocking to learn this, and the Britons stood no chance because the Germans had two advantages. First, Germans had more resources and weapons. For example, to put it in perspective, the Germans had around 2,000 fighter jets, while the Britons only had 700. But the second thing that helped Germany in the war and in the future was the technique made by the cruel man, Adolf Hitler, called Blitzkrieg. This technique uses the planes to surprise the enemy with a surprise attack and then attack them with tanks and the army on the ground, cornering the enemy. There are some good movies based on this event as well, like the Battle of Britain and more. Some people wonder why Germany and USSR haven't fought till now. But that's because of the treaty called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed by both Germany and the Soviet Union in 1939, shortly before World War II. Back to the war between Britain and Germany. When the Germans attacked, there is an unwritten rule of first attacking the enemy's army and then attacking the cities of the country. But Adolf Hitler was an evil man who wouldn't show any mercy. He was the man who killed millions of Jews. To put it into perspective, there were 9 million Jews before the war, but only 3 million survived after the war ended because the rest were killed by Adolf Hitler. He was a man feared around nations. Back to the war, he bombed the cities like London and other cities for a very long period. And in response, the Britons bombed German cities like Berlin and more. After a fierce battle, the Germans came out on top, surprising the whole world. Against their odds, the Britain army took down the Germans, which was the first loss for Hitler. Now this fight between Germany and Britain had a long backstory going back to World War I. After World War I, the whole world agreed that Germany should pay the fine for all the loss they did in World War I, which was of around $33 billion, which now equals to $270 billion. This payment was such a loss for the Germans that in the recent 2010s they were finally able to pay off the debt, meaning it took 100 years to pay back for all the loss. But when the Germans started to pay in the start, the money obviously came from the economy and the government, destroying the whole country's economy. The currency of the Germans, called marks, at that time, went from the price of one packet of bread, being 143 marks, to 230 billion marks. So during this, the era known as the Great Depression. During this, our main character, Adolf Hitler, A young politician was rising up the ranks with his dream of starting the German Empire. So, when Hitler becomes the leader of the Germans, he decided to create an army, which was a violation for the treaty called the Treaty of Versailles. But everyone still let him do his thing because no one wanted war after the previous events. Then Hitler invades Poland, ignoring all the warnings given to him from Britain and starting World War II. Now back to the current situation in the war. After the loss, Hitler changes his focus from the UK to the Soviet Union. Now before explaining that, we need to know about the countries that formed an alliance with the Germans, are Yugoslavia and Greece, with giving the Germans their land and everything, with the Italians as just allies. The countries the Germans are allied with in this point of time are now known as the Axis power. Now, let's focus on the point that why did Hitler want to invade Germany, even with the treaty placed between them? Well, the thing is that when the Germans fought the Britons, Hitler wasn't really interested in fighting them, but rather wanted a peace treaty with them. So, he wanted to attack Soviet Union to fulfill his ideology. He actually hates communism, and his dream of being the #1 power can be fulfilled by capturing the Soviet Union. But declaring war on the Soviet Union was the biggest mistake of Hitler. In fact, it was the turning point of the whole war. The war starts with Hitler's plan being to finish the war as quickly as possible and rapidly invade the Soviet Union and go deep around 100 kilometers. With only 300 kilometers left from Moscow, the Soviet Union gets pressured and they ally with Britain to fight against Germany. So the Britons helped the Soviets by sending resources through Iran and ending at the Soviet Union. But the Iran was with Hitler, so they refused to go along, so the Soviet Union and the British invade Iran as well. But then a miracle happens for the Soviet Union. Winter starts coming, and it's beneficial for Soviet Union because they are trained specifically to fight in the cold. But on the other side of the Soviet Union is the Japanese Empire trying to get powerful. And the Soviet Union and the Japanese sign a treaty, and the army of the Soviet Union fighting the Japanese on the eastern side come to fight Hitler's army. While this battle is happening without any provocation, the Japanese attack the city of Pearl Harbor and bomb the place. Now, the Americans were trying to stay out of this war as much as possible because they had already suffered enough in World War I and didn't want to join the problems of Hitler and the German Empire. But the Japanese attack on the Americans changes everything.
I ask that the Congress declare a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
They officially declare war on the Japanese, and they enter World War II. America takes a few months of time for preparation, and during that joins with the Allied forces that include big powers like the Chinese, Soviet Union, UK, and now America. Now, on one side, Hitler focuses on the supply chain of the Soviet Union that goes through Iran and attacks there. While on the other side, the battle between Japan and the Allies have with Japan serving major losses. And while the Germans are fighting in Stalingrad, one of the most deadliest war in World War II occur, and the German troops surrender in February 13th. was all looking very bad for Hitler, and in the last 4 months of the World War, almost 3,000 people were getting killed every single day. Finally, in the day 30th April 1945, Hitler kills himself when surrounded by the Soviets, and a few days later, the Germans surrender. And after this magnificent event, a lot of countries' borders are redrawn and Europe goes back to normal. On October 1945, the United Nations have also been established to make sure we don't have to see a massacre world war like this again in the upcoming future. But the war still wasn't over. Japan still takes 2 months to surrender because of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this way, the whole war ends being marked as one of the greatest wars in history.